Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Okay, cool. So just to get us started, maybe give me a quick run through of what you're prepping for, as well as what you're looking to get out of this. That way, I can make sure like we target that exactly and get the most value for you out of this.
Yep. So I'm interviewing for some like senior machine learning ML ops positions, and I
Mm-hmm.
will be getting some like machine learning system design questions along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the angle, I think. Now I'm not sure. The company I'm actually interviewing for does like a lot of payments stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they'll give me one that's like focused on that, or if they'll just give me like a random machine learning ops question. So I'm not sure.
I see. Okay, so lots of infrastructure monitoring and something along the lines. And given that it's a payment, probably along the lines of anomaly detection in this case, right?
Could be. I don't know.
All
uh,
right, I'm just saying, yeah, like it's like a best bet kind of situation because what I usually try to do is, given the company or the target company, I try and think of problems that have a high probability of showing up. Who knows? If you practice with that and it shows up, that's a good thing, right?
yeah. So the company is Upstart. They do lending.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if it's as much anomaly. I mean, it could be anomaly detection.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I'm not sure.
I hear you. Okay, makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, fortunately, the infrastructure roughly stays the same because it's usually if you have a model handy, then it's more or less about scaling up and making it available. So the process stays roughly the same regardless of the application, although contextually it can be different, especially when thinking about requirements.
Yeah.
And I noticed that this is a mentorship session. So have you done any such interview before? And if so, what's your comfort level with machine learning interviews overall?
So I've done plenty of like normal SWE interviews. I am
Hmm.
not as experienced in system design stuff um,
Hmm.
in general, and so technically, the way this like it's kind of weird. The package, the way it worked was basically like I wanted a staff engineer who did machine learning, and we couldn't find a match, so they said we'll throw in a free machine learning infra interview for you. So I was like, okay, cool. So kind of how this is like marked as a mentorship session. Um,
I see.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool. And final question, at least before we jump in here, and have you done any prep along the lines?
I've
Like, are
done
you comfortable with that
a
process?
little bit of prep with Alex Zhu's book.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, I read like the first four chapters or so.
Perfect. Yeah, if you've done that at the very least, then you're in a good place. And TLDR, just to set expectations, the process is roughly the same as traditional system design. The only difference will be maybe less of the estimates, a bit of extra time on the APIs, and at the end of the day, in terms of monitoring, it's not the traditional stats like P90 and whatever it is. It will focus on ML specific metrics depending on the model you choose. So it's fairly straightforward process. So
Okay.
yeah, I have a proposal at least for this interview in order to help make sure that you get that practice. So I give a question to you, a prompt to you as though it's a normal question, and you'll go through it. And now, unlike traditional MOOCs where I'll reserve feedback for the end, if there are any glaring weaknesses, I can kind of stop you in the moment, suggest a way we can improve, and then try again. And then if there's anything that's good enough, I can reserve feedback towards the end. Like so minor things reserve feedback for the end. Major things kind of stop, we iterate, and then think of better ways to do. That way, we target the big weaknesses if any, and then for the minor ones, just give resources or like stuff you can practice on async. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds good to me.
Perfect. Okay. And so, building on the same problem. So what we're going to try and do here is essentially something more traditional. We're going to, again, target then. Okay, what is happening with this thing? Are you able to see what's going on the screen?
Yeah. You're typing a bunch.
Yeah, okay, I'll reload so that the bug goes off. I don't know what's going on with.
Oh. Oh.
Okay, you're able to see my screen, right? Oh, you see me type.
Sorry. Yeah, it was some weird infinite loop thing. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to focus on an anomaly detection problem, and in this regard, we're going to focus on. Actually, let me even twist it up a bit. So let me generalize. Even instead of anomaly detection, let's think of harmful content removal. So it's somewhat anomaly detection, but I think it gives us a better, more generalized framework. And we're not going to target a payments company yet. So think in terms of Reddit. And the beauty of it is it gives us multiple media types. So I'll give you an initialization here. Imagine we have Reddit. So we have the subreddits, we have the reactions, and a couple of things to get you started. We have the ability to report posts. We have the ability to, let's say, react posts. And so we also support the following types of posts. So images, short videos, but mostly it's text.
Okay.
So this is like, our watered down version of Reddit. So given that, what I would like you to do is think of how you will build out a system to essentially handle harmful content removal. And by harmful content, and feel free to add to this is what we mean.
Mm-hmm.
Would entail content related to abuse, content related to nudity, content related to what else? Violence, and misinformation. This one is especially tricky since it's hard to know, but we can think of it as an extended goal. We can discuss it once we have the rest done. So that's kind of the synopsis of this. Feel free to take over. Just run me through how, if you were to build this system, assuming this watered down version of Reddit exists, how you would go by that.
So I have a couple questions in terms of the overall, I guess, requirements gathering. So I guess the first question is how soon do we need to moderate content, right? So somebody posts a picture, I guess even before this, is this a reactionary system or is this a proactive system?
Excellent question. So I would say maybe let's target a hybrid where for some content, or especially categories of content that are extremely harmful, we basically react ASAP. And for some other contents, we can maybe take a day, right?
Okay.
So we are open to different or variation in timing in this case, depending on the type of harm.
So certainly with nudity, violence, I think another one is called C-SPAM or something like that. Those are all things that we'd want to take down immediately, this would be proactive. And then other pieces of content abuse is would go in here as well. But we would say for the reactive case, perhaps misinformation is a different thing here. Okay. And this is just posts and reactions to posts. There's no comments or anything like that. And then I'm assuming there's other pipelines that when you post something, it's not in terms of Reddit, the I guess SLO for post to feed time is probably not on the order of milliseconds. It's probably on the order of seconds. Just an assumption here, are there other background data processing jobs that are actually going on in this system, or will this be the first of these?
Excellent question. So you can assume you have some background jobs. That said, I'll also give you the freedom to define what jobs you think will be convenient. And if you think exposing the data that they are processing, either in state or after,
Okay. Okay. First async system. Okay, cool. Let's see. Let's get a sense of like what are the number of like the volume of posts and reactions per day. So this is like Reddit, right? Reddit's supposed to have like 50 million daily active users. I don't know if they're posting 50 million videos a day. It's probably, well, like then we can just do sort of like a range estimate of like in the 1 to hundreds of millions of posts. And then just a clarification, a post, does that include comments? Not comments. Okay, so we don't care about comments. I'd probably revise this to be down a little bit, maybe like to 50 million posts per day, including all of the content that's in it. Let's see. Do we?
Quick question. Quick question on that. So when you say 50 million posts, do you have a distribution in mind? Because given what you have on line 6, it will be good to think about how this is distributed, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah. So given so if there's 50 million posts, then like if we're saying most of the texts are posts, or sorry, most of the posts are text only. If we said like most meaning maybe 80%, if we say 80% are 80% are text only. This would leave us what would that actually be? I am not good at math right now. 40 million to million text posts per day with like a mix of image and video, so like up to 10 million images and videos per day.
And yeah. Do you, in terms of videos in this regard, are there any assumptions you're making with respect to what the size of the video is going to be, as well as what the input format is going to be? So are you thinking somebody will upload an actual video, or will they link a YouTube video, a Vimeo video that's going to be, let's say, rendered in an iframe in Reddit?
Yeah. So good question. My assumption is that's true. So text can have links. So that'll be something to consider. We'll need like a link detection deal here, service. If there's a video, I'm assuming the videos are direct uploads, so we'll be able to like analyze them within our system. These are like directly attached. Yeah, because otherwise it's really hard to moderate if somebody's adding like a YouTube embed. I mean, one, we assume that YouTube's doing their own moderation, they're doing a good job, and two, like if there's a sketchy link, then what we may want to do is actually like queue this stuff up. So I guess the next question is like, do we have some data sets around of existing content that is like labeled? Or is there like, or like, do we need a labeling / like manual review system?
Excellent question. So on line 31, I'll make reference to line 4. So feel free to make assumptions about having a human in the loop. So we will actually have a continuous stream of some of the posts that will be labeled depending on the category. So we do have humans in the loop, and we actually do have a mechanism available for reports.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that mechanism, from what I'm familiar with, is basically like the way the mechanism is structured is they monitor the number of reports. If reports exceed some threshold, a queue for manual review, and then we get the labels there. So in terms of data set size and distribution, can we assume that the training data that we have is mirrors the mirrors the population data set distribution? An assumption is maybe like images are more frequently moderated than text only, and so like it could be the case that the data set has like 50% images, 50% text, whereas we're getting 80% text from our like prod distribution.
I see. So yeah, I think it's fair to assume that the rate of report should, or the size of the data set in this case, especially since, from my point of view, any abuse is always going to be abuse. So once it's in the database, we can always reuse it in the future. So to a degree, it's kind of hard to argue that the distribution of data we have currently will be the distribution all the time. But for now, I think for simplicity purposes, I think that's a fair assumption to make, at least for design purposes.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Cool.
In addition to that, I was actually going to suggest it might be worth thinking of data drift ahead of time in this case, because 1 year ago, 2 years ago, even 5 years ago, we remember images were the thing, like it was a bigger deal. But now with the age of TikTok, now that's a bigger deal, right? People are looking at videos more often, and this is why, like I'm saying, it might be hard to argue that the distribution will stay static, but at the end of the day, the data is always going to be the same. It's always going to be abused, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the another question is like, what percentage of posts are marked harmful? So I'm assuming it's in like a 1 to 2% range kind of thing here. Like a very low number of posts, right?
Yeah, Reddit is crazy. So yep, that's a fair assumption.
Maybe Reddit's like 5%. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, with that platform, man. Twitter is worse, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, or like Twitter. Yeah. So I guess the last thing I think I wanted to cover here. Well, I think I have enough in terms of like requirements to kind of move forward here. I know it's in terms of like machine learning today, like multimodal is starting to really take over, where you can just sort of give a machine learning model. Like I think Salesforce came out with InstructBlip like pretty recently, and you can just like feed the model like kind of anything, and it'll figure out like whether the model is it'll figure out like whether the actual like content is something like abusive or violent, or might be misinformation or something like that. The more like traditional way of setting it up is just having like kind of one model per modality. And so like that's the system I'm more familiar with, but I like today, if I were setting this up from scratch, or even just like joining a company, I'd really look at multimodal first to see if there are like wins there. And then, but the system I'm proposing for the interview is the one I'm more familiar with, which is just unimodal, right?
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's make the assumption that either we have an ensemble that essentially gives us a multi-modality functionality. So, it kind of marries the two ideas where you have one model that can do it all with all data types. Alternatively, you can spin out separate models. In fact, I would actually argue it might be worth going with your intuition here. Let's go with the traditional approach. Reason being, we already made the assumption that there might be more images that are harmful. So if we have one model, yet most of our content is going to expect, let's say, images, we might want to scale that up without we might want to scale the processor for the what do you call it, for the images in this case, while leaving the text on to stay constant. But that said, before, with all the model assumptions made, I would like you to talk about pre-processing. Like, given this data that we have, is there any pre-processing steps you might want to make in order to make this data available? Because my assumption is, regardless of the type of model we have, we still have to process the different data types to make it ready for the model with the target standard input type, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a few pieces here. In terms of pre-processing, we can kind of split it up. So for text, just plain text, there's tokenization that you need to do. I can't spell tokenization. And so, like, basically, it's the process of what, like in NLP, you used to do, where you do like stemming, removing stop words, and trying to like clean up capitalizations, fix misspellings, and things like that. Like, was like traditionally thing you do. Nowadays, there's libraries that basically break words up into tokens, and then creates kind of like a sort of I want to say it just assigns like an ID to each of the tokens, and then that's sort of like the sequence of like features that are fed into a NLP model. I think like a popular one was a tick token by like OpenAI.
Tick token.
Yeah. That'll actually do the tokenization of the text. And then for like images and video, some of the things that are really important for like pre-processing, I think the first one is like making sure that the dimensions of the images are like correctly sized. Because if there's images that are like bigger or smaller, trying to fit all those things into the model definitely will like cause some issues. And so you want to like scale the image. So I haven't worked with video much, but I can say like for images, you definitely want to like scale it. And then also, like, if we are working with a very low % of harmful content, sometimes it can help to upsample these images by like doing things like adding a rotation, what's it called, where you change the like hue, saturation, brightness. There's a special, I don't, changing like HSL values. So like brightening an image, darkening an image, doing all that, or like changing the contrast of the image in terms of like pre-processing to kind of get more sample in there.
Makes sense. My question actually, I have two questions particularly here. So, and totally okay if you're not familiar with any of this, but this is actually a very interesting point, especially in the context of Reddit. So when it comes to tokenization here, there are multiple strategies we can use. You don't have to cite any specific tokenization strategies, but in terms of token size, how long do you think each token should be? And for reference, n-gram is usually like, intra-word. It can be 2 or 3 syllables. Yet you can also have bag of words, which in that regard, it looks at entire words in this case. Or you can even have multi-word tokenization strategies where it looks at samples of phrases or something like that, and maybe looks at overlap. So in terms of tokenization, which strategy do you think would make most sense in our case, and why?
Good question. I think so. Like single, kind of like single word tokenization sort of seems to make. I mean, you can't like tokenize exactly a word. I believe like there's something like you pick like 8 characters, and that should be enough to sort of encompass most words, and then some words get chunked into 2 tokens. I think that's at least like what I'm kind of familiar with in the space. I guess like what are the trade-offs there? I think there's definitely a trade-off between like the more unique tokens you sorry, there's a plane.
So good. Totally understand. Yeah. I live next to the Boeing HQ, so trust me, I hear that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a trade-off with the number of like token values that your like vocabulary has. So you have to be careful. Like if you only do one character, you end up with like, if you use ASCII, like 256 values. But I don't think the models are as good at being able to like pull out context on a like per character basis. Now, if you do like a bigger token size, then you'll have a lot more unique values. So models will, I mean, I think up to a certain extent, models will do like pretty well on attention. It's just that now you're feeding in like a larger, I guess like you kind of blow up the size of your embedding table a little bit. So you have to kind of watch out for your memory of your system.
Excellent. That's exactly what I was targeting right there. And it's really, really good that you brought in context, because abuse is in context, dirty words always have the same characters as praise. So in that regard, I think you're right. I think I would also lean towards single word, probably towards multiple word tokenization, especially since nowadays a lot of abuse will lean towards the 3-4 words. Like people will combine multiple words. A single word that is sometimes abusive might not necessarily be abusive. If let's say I'm describing the word stupid, in itself it might not be abusive. But if you're calling a person stupid, then that is actually an insult. So I think multi-word tokenization, you can also justify single word tokenization in that regard. And then there's something you mentioned that made me think a bit. So you mentioned that we need to be mindful of performance, but that's where maybe I might question it a bit, because if we have, let's say, single word or multi-word tokenization, then to a degree we are reducing the total cardinality of the total number of tokens generated from any particular text input, which could actually end up helping with performance, compared to, let's say, doing an n-gram tokenization where we are looking at individual characters. So do you think, let's say, this approach would actually end up meaning something in terms of path? Like, what's your intuition on that?
So basically, just to reiterate what you just said, the idea is like as you choose like a larger, like a multi-wad like token, that should result in an increase in the number of what do you call it? It's like a decrease in the sequence length, but also an increase in the kind of like embedding table size, right? So I guess like in terms of performance, I'm not actually 100% sure on what would actually end up causing the most issues. I think like my feeling is that at training time, having like a larger embedding table can be more memory intensive, but at inference time, your context, like the sequence length that you actually need, should be like shorter, and so the inference should be quicker because you're just doing less like matrix multiplication at inference time. That's my intuition on it, I think.
That kind of confuses me though, because technically with the reduced number of token sizes, or with the reduced number of tokens, we should technically also have a reduced embedding table size, because each of the because the size of the embeddings themselves, actually the number of embeddings should stay roughly the same. The size of the embeddings is what will vary, right?
Right. Yeah.
And just to also a bit further, in terms of sparsity, do you think there are any implications with, let's say, a multi-word tokenization compared to, let's say, n-gram tokenization?
In terms of sparsity,
Yeah, like
I mean, so I guess like with this is just a guess because I don't actually know, but I'm guessing like there's a I'm guessing with like n-grams, there's probably a higher sparsity of tokenization. Um, Hello? Did I lose you? Hello? Hmm. All right, hello? Hello? Oh,
hello.
I hear something.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, sorry. I was saying you are right. Your intuition is very correct on that because objectively, if we have n-grams, we have a huge embedding table because there are too many unique values. And so for it to make sense, you have to have huge embeddings in this case, probably more than 1036, which we have with tick token.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, most of the values will be zeros. And so
Yeah.
we'll end up with too many zeros and too little information. But with multi-word tokenization, smaller embeddings, which will mostly have values because in this case, essentially with the same size of input, we have fewer boxes to hit. And so not only will they be more useful because they encapsulate context too, and so it also ends up helping with performance in that regard. But anyway, sorry, we spent a bit too much time on that. So I think we can move on in this regard. Let's maybe talk about the API. So given what we have here, talk to me about some APIs you might want to design in order to serve this data.
Yeah. So let's see. So I could see like a few different systems here. I mean, so the idea is that we kind of said we're going to do single modal inference and inference. In this case, it could be done as like a batch inference or online. To me, they kind of like both work because technically it's an async process, but also like this data is kind of coming in as a stream. So like to me, I think it's just like easier to kind of model it as an online inference system, and it's just sort of like a little more future proof. If you do need it to be more real time, it will still be there. You don't have to migrate from batch to real time in that case. So like there's basically going to be 3 services, one for image, one for text, and one for video. They'll all have like the same APIs. So maybe it's like moderate. So you could say service.moderate, and then the request should be like post request. And if we're thinking about like what kind of data we want for the body, so we should have like features, and then we'll pass in a list of features. I guess like the services should be doing the same pre-processing that we're doing to generate the data and train the model with it. So I think like these features, I mean, in reality, the way this would kind of work is that you'd use like feature IDs and then sort of work through some kind of a feature store. So So this is actually something I didn't cover, but I feel like we should talk about is it's not just image, text, and video, but also like user profiles might also be something that we want to like consider, at least in the future. So it's not just like show me an image, it's like show me an image by a like particular user, and then maybe that helps with identifying things like misinformation, like if there's a post and that user has been reported a number of times, maybe that actually like positively impact. But maybe that's like I'm like, sorry, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I'm a little disorganized. I think having the 3 services here and then another service, a 4th one for just text misinformation. Makes sense. Because these are a lot easier to moderate, and then with misinformation, it's a little more subjective, and the model may end up having features in it that the text model doesn't need to include. So that's why I'm kind of like building this out as a separate service here. So for this API, you'll pass in a list of features. Maybe it's as simple as just saying like a dictionary, and then we can say the text for texts, right? 1, 2, 3, or for same with images, it would just be the blob or video. So the blob and the bytes. And then the same thing with the video, right? So that's just the kind of the API there. And then the response is going to be a list of labels and confidences. So you'd say like results, and then so we'll have like a label, and then so we may want to say like this is like the abuse label, and then we can give a like confidence, and then this will be a float between 0 and 1. So this could be like 9 and 3, and then like we can have other labels here as well. So we'd have like labels for nudity violence. And then, yeah, so these would be like the labels. Yeah. So that's basically the APIs of the service. In terms of like, there's a few important things here, which is like as a system as a whole, there are, well, the thing I want to touch on is like there's training metrics, and then there's online metrics, and like how are we doing. So for things like online metrics, like actual production metrics, we want to cover things like the number of, we call it harmful, we'll call it harmful impressions. And so that's just the number of people that have seen these things. And then like number of reports.
Nice.
And maybe even, so there's impressions, and then also maybe like a time-based one. So like average time to take down. So when something is like posted reactively and we need to take it down, we want to be able to take it down quicker, and hopefully models will facilitate that takedown time. In terms of actual like training metrics, some of the things that we want to like consider here. So when we're training on image, text, or video, we're doing a multi-class classification, which means that we'll be doing a I get them mixed up all the time. It's
precision and recall, or
sorry. Yeah. So we care about precision and recall.
right.
And so precision is basically the number of true positives divided by the true positives plus the false positives, and recall is true positives divided by true positives plus the false negatives. In terms of like how we want to actually like present this, I think just presenting in terms of precision and recall is fine. Like we don't have to do an F1 score or like a receiver operator curve. Just leaving as precision and recall works. Yeah, any questions on this piece?
Nope, no question on that. Maybe just a quick suggestion, because I was literally typing feedback on this bit, because I totally relate to you on one bit. I absolutely hate these two terms because I rarely remember what exactly they are.
Yeah.
And so my fallback is literally saying, I'm just going to generate a confusion matrix because it's going to allow me to interpret the same metrics the same way. Like I'm better with the intuition rather than the terminologies. But I totally hear you on this. Yeah, and this makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's that for training metrics.
Actually, sorry, quick question. Objectively speaking, because given these metrics, these training metrics are there, can you define to me the objective of the model in terms of the two metrics?
Yeah. So you're talking about like the loss function?
Not necessarily the loss function. We can speak on that later, given we have a multi-classification problem here. But I'm interested in what is the goal? Like, do you want to minimize precision while maximizing recall, or do you want to maximize both? Like, what's the goal particularly in our case?
Yeah. So I think so this is actually interesting because like it depends on the business objectives and time. So I've actually seen that at my company where we basically said like for a while we were okay with businesses. We were okay with being very strict in terms of I want to say like false negatives, and then the economic downturn kind of happened, and then we kind of said like, hey, we don't want to be we want less false positives because we want people to actually spend on our platform. And so we were actually willing to trade off like recall, I think, back for precision, or might have been the other way around. But like, so it's kind of business metrics. But if you're trying to juice engagement, then you want to be careful with. I think it's okay. So false negative in this case would be classifying something as harmful when it's not. Yep, and so if you're trying to like juice engagement metrics, having a very high precision and low recall is good. Because if you have high precision, low recall, what we're basically saying is we're trying to, we're okay with like harmful content, making it past the model, because we don't want to block like good content.
Makes sense. Yep. So in this case, essentially what you're saying is we're okay with people being too sensitive rather than being less sensitive and us missing on actual abuse content. Like it's okay if they report something and we find out it's not harmful and restore it rather than the opposite where they fail to report or we fail to flag, and excellent. So we're basically making our thresholds very low for what abuse or what a flag for abuse should be. But then we, of course, we have the human in the loop, so we'll always have a restoration process for those who did that. Yeah, I think that's an excellent approach, and I was actually very happy with that because I was gonna grill you after that on that point. Like, would you want it to be, the opposite, and why? But I think you immediately went to it, which was excellent.
Yeah.
And then, final question, at least on.
Sorry, I was gonna sort of make a joke, which is this is until you have to advertise on the platform and brand, and you have to change your strategy.
Although, actually, if you think about it, though, that strategy can actually help, because if we are worried about advertisement, then unless we are worried about the rate of reporting on adverts, because we know it will always annoy people and then they'll report it. But I think advertisers will probably be happy with a platform that's a bit more strict, because look at, let's say, Twitter, right? Twitter is not strict at all right now on abuse, and they pulled up because they don't want the possibility of being mixed in with, right? So to a degree, that strategy will actually help with ads. What do you think?
The opposite strategy, right? Because what we're saying is we'll let some harmful content through, and because we don't want to block good content accidentally, and then if we want to be brand safe, we'll actually start blocking more harmful content at the expense of blocking some good ones every once in a while. So we're more brand safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, we're in line on that. Okay. And then let's see. I had a final question with respect to metrics, and then the next section I wanted you to focus on before at least to get a feedback is just scaling. So just pure architecture talk. So I was thinking, how are you going to scale it up? But before we do that, now that we have our objective function, our objective in this case, can you talk to me about the loss function? Like if you're going to choose a loss function here for your model, like this is the most technical, I'll get to the model, but what loss function do you think would make most sense?
Yeah, so the loss function is, I'm blanking. So it's a multi-class classification, and I know that you apply, you're supposed to apply a softmax at the very end, and then what you do is you compute the loss. The loss is, in this case, like, the only one I'm thinking of is, there's two, like mean squared error or like maximum likelihood. I mean, I think like maximum likelihood sounds like it'd be the right loss function, but I'm gonna have a hard time with this section because I definitely need to study up on my loss functions.
All right. Are you familiar with cross entropy?
Somewhat familiar with cross entropy. I think it's, I mean, I know the word. I don't know what it represents at the moment.
Yeah, so the reason I brought that up is because, at least from my understanding, it's been a while since I had to meddle around with maximum likelihood, but I remember it as a way of estimating my parameters for my model, but not necessarily for a loss function. It's actually used more so for tuning the parameters, but the loss functions, they tend to be things like cross entropy. It could be, there's binary cross entropy when you have two labels, or multi-level cross entropy when you have multiple levels. There are things like hinge loss, maybe focal loss, and a couple of other examples. I cannot think of all of them off of the top of my head. But honestly, and this is just a quick tip, cross entropy will almost always be a good answer when you're asked about the loss function. The only difference might be you need to showcase the intuition on the variant. So things like multi-label or binary, as well as understanding how it penalizes false predictions. Now, the downside to it, though, is it's excellent for supervised problems where we have labeled input. In our case, that would work well. But for unsupervised problems, that becomes a bit of a problem. And this is where, if you think of, let's say, pre-clustering in order to get a sense of, let's say, some sense of labels, that might actually be helpful.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then final bit of probing in this case. So talk to me about deployment. So say we've set this up. How are you thinking of, let's say, scaling the system up if need be? And like, are you going to have like a multi-service architecture or like a monolith? Like, what's your intuition on it?
Yeah. So there's a few things here. The first like point is, you know, my initial launch, I'd want the models to be small enough to fit on a single like GPU for inference. Because if I have to do like a distributed GPU thing, that just adds more complexity to the system. So like single GPU inference, that'd be nice. You know, we basically put a load balancer in front of a number of these instances. I think each of the major frameworks has like their own serving framework. So like PyTorch and TensorFlow have their own like serving infrastructure. So I would just run it on top of that. Yeah, I mean, like in terms of like doing a couple things that are important, I'd want to make sure that I'm logging all of the features at request time. That's one thing I want to do to make sure I minimize the amount of potential data leakage that's happening in terms of like rolling that data out into the new data set. And then also we want some like metrics and monitoring to watch for data set distribution shifts. So things like anomaly detection, just to figure out like, hey, are we getting a bunch of nulls for a particular feature? Like in this case, it's text, images, and videos. But if we're doing something with like misinformation where we care about the user profile, like you do care about that kind of like data distribution shift. And also like you want to look for your label shifts too. Like there could just be like all of a sudden one day everyone's posting a bunch of crypto nonsense and like you're predicting a lot more like abuse on the platform that day. So you do need to be able to alert, say like, hey, our models are kind of going off the rails here. The system that I would actually set up, okay, so there's scaling. Scaling, I would just do a load balancer with a cluster of machines as CPU or GPU, I guess, utilization reaches a threshold, add more clusters to the machine and auto scale. The thing I would want to do though is on any new model rollout to do an A/B study, just to see how the model is performing online versus the existing baseline before just blindly deploying it out to production.
Excellent. I think that certainly makes sense. And, you know, just a quick pointer in addition to what you've just mentioned, there are also other benefits to think about, given that our service, you know, and maybe you should have clarified this initially, it ought to be global. Abuse in the US might not necessarily be abuse in some other place. And in similar regard, we have inputs that might be different, that might completely distort the model. Like, you know, we want to stratify the models by geographic features like language. Like, you know, what might happen in China versus what might happen in Russia. The languages are completely different, the input is different. So we probably want different flavors of the models. And so your approach here where we have mini models or microservices essentially and distributing them depending on the data service, that will end up being a very useful approach for this purpose too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, having like regional deployment.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. I will add a couple more to make sure we are going through feedback exhaustively. But for context, I never give feedback straight up. I usually want to first get your intuition. So looking back at the interview, what do you think you did well and what do you think you could improve on?
I think I did all right with the initial part, the sort of like requirements gathering. I definitely need to go deeper. Well, I got like stuck on the tokenization piece. So like I think there's just a little bit more focus on some of the machine learning aspects of things, like, you know, what are some of the more like common like pre-processing steps, tokenization be one of them, looking at like the different scalings and things like that, like doing log transformations when your data distribution isn't exactly Gaussian. Things like that I need to just like refresh on. Uh, I thought like the API endpoint part was fine. Yeah, like I don't know if there's anything like really glaring there. I mean, ultimately, I feel like, you know, I'm not sure. I mean, I called it out in the beginning, which was like, we really should be doing a multimodal system that's just like more intelligent. I have a feeling that that would actually perform better. But like, so I'm glad I called that out and then went with the system that I'm a little bit more familiar with, so I could actually like see each of these things. I'm not actually sure if it's like better to do it that way in a real interview, or if it's like by going this way, I'm giving the interviewer an opportunity to dig on like let's talk about image related models, let's talk about like text related models, versus like potentially like if I'm saying let's build some like multimodal system and the interviewer doesn't know how to or isn't familiar with multimodal systems, then like I'm not sure if they're getting signal, so I'm not sure if that's like the right path to take there. I did just like I need to just do better on my loss function stuff, and just kind of yeah didn't get that piece. And then I mean other than that, like I think everything kind of did all right. So that's sort of how I feel like I felt. There's some ups and downs. Definitely not like the perfect interview.
I'll say, here's the thing. I rarely find a person who signs up for mentorship, but then at the end I'm telling them, I will probably give you a pass. So you actually did pretty darn well. So I still took a ton of notes, as I said. So, you know, to start with, keeping it short, I frankly think you're almost there. Like, if I was to give you like feedback in case you want to sign up for more sessions, you probably need at most 5, if not three, just to kind of refine the process. Because in terms of content, you probably are one of the few people who've been able to keep up with the line of questioning I've asked, which was excellent. So, you know, just to go through the feedback, and mind you, I'll paste all of this in addition to some extra resources you can look at the end. For the most part, I agree with you. But, you know, objectively, communication, excellent. Like, you're really easy to communicate with, easy to follow. Even throwing jokes on occasion in the interview, which keeps it lighthearted. So really, really did well with that. And then the line of questioning with respect to background processes, I really, really like that, because most people fail to think about that. They think they have to design Reddit. In fact, one of the biggest problems I've had with candidates is you ask them to to design a harmful content detection process, but they don't think about the background processes that exist. So you started with that, make it a point in any interview. Like, nobody is asking to design the actual system. They're designing a new system in addition to the platform that's already there. So feel free to denote exactly what you think already exists. And maybe this is where one bit of improvement we can have here is actually detailing those bits. So if we expect that, let's say, Reddit will give us APIs that can extract text, or alternatively, if we expect that we have a push model where if a post is made, our model automatically consumes that post, or, you know, has that post pushed into, let's say, some message queue where we can consume it and process it. It will be good to talk about it from that stage. And in fact, for most machine learning interviews, I think that's probably the best stage to start at. Just thinking about what's my input like, what's the current platform giving me in terms of input. Of course, if it's not like a platform-based system, it could be different, but typically data source is always the first stage. But it was really, really good to hear you actually talk about that, because it showed that you had the intuition to think about that bit. And then on line 85, I mentioned the pre-processing bit. I felt as though you were not thinking about it until I pushed you in that direction. And so, yeah, right? Like, I had to actually ask you, okay, well, how are you going to standardize this? How are you going to pre-process it? But once I asked you, you went in depth on tokenization, pre-processing, removal of stopwords. It is key to think about that, because part of the ML system design, in fact, sometimes you may find that that's the stage that requires the most ML system design work, because these are heavy processes. Like, you can imagine, when you have a bunch of images or even, let's say, videos where you have to do frame sampling, then that's computationally intensive. And it's usually worthwhile thinking about how that setup is going to look like, what those features, once you've extracted the features, because this is basically the feature engineering part. Once you've extracted them, where you're going to store them, because you don't want to process all of that and then all that data is basically output into some log file. You want to actually think about the data output in that case. Talk about, let's say, Redis or whatever data tiered storage solution you have, where the model can consume from there in a quick manner. So it might be worthwhile talking about API endpoints there. Maybe talk about them being backed by, let's say, I don't know, Redis or some other system. So that's stage one of the system design. And then, I give you a breakdown. You can clearly see on line 82 on how I typically do it. It's kind of worked well for me. Maybe it can inspire you to curate a process for you. So typically it's usually requirements, pre-processing, and then define my APIs, both the input and output, before I even jump into the model stuff. And then I think we delved deep here. Yeah, I actually made the point on that. You went deep into it, so I didn't really have any line of questioning on that, so that was good. So for the tokenization bit, I think we kind of covered much of that conversation in the interview, but refresh on that. That way, at least you have a stronger sense of the intuition between, of the implication on performance between short-term and long-term. So clearly, that's probably the weakest point of the interview, because I felt like we were going through, like, it's kind of like throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. But for the most part, it was good that you even knew of the different tokenization strategies. You even went to a level of giving me examples, which I could identify, so I really appreciated that. And then, let's see, I think this is the same point I've made there, where pre-processing is always step one, so it was good that we talked about that. And then, in terms of output, I felt like you really, once you were done with like the core APIs, the rest of the stages were perfect. Like, it was like you talked about the output you expect. In fact, the funny thing, when you said the API was okay, to me it was like, this is probably closer to what I would want to see in an interview, where somebody actually gives me example payloads. I always ask for example payloads. Most people won't give that. So this was actually really, really good. So the only maybe, these are needs, I would say, maybe include the expected protocols. Although for machine learning system design, I don't think I'll push anybody down to that, up to that level. But the reason why I might want to converse about that is sometimes it's worth thinking about, let's say, the concurrency or the number of requests I expect. So if this API, which is it's going to expect a lot of, let's say, get requests. Get requests tend to be more performant than, let's say, post requests. So when you're talking about that, especially in this case, there will be a lot of text requests coming in. Like, as soon as a post is made, the request is made. So there should be a ton of them, especially since the sheer volume is going to be a lot. But most of the payloads will be tiny. So in that case, we probably want to have lightweight post requests in this case. Although maybe the downside might be, since most of the requests will correspond to a unique thread, then maybe post might is that actually good? Is it post or put? Like, in terms of method, because we want to create a
post is kind of like, there's two ways of thinking about it. It's like REST, and then there's just like JSON RPC. So if you're thinking about it in terms of like REST, a post request is more like you tend to create something, and a put is like an update on the full entity. But like the people who like gRPC is all post requests, even if you want to get something.
I see. Which one is the one that has the idempotency? I think it's a post. Is it post or put? Like, in terms of like a session idempotency, or can't remember which one it was.
I mean, I would assume like splits are. I mean, they're both supposed to be idempotent. I think it's a. Yeah, I don't think it should matter. Like for instance, if you're doing a payment endpoint, you want to post to like create the payment, but that would be idempotent. Like if you try and call it twice, it needs to like have the same result twice, I believe.
Yeah, actually, I do believe put is actually idempotent, while post is not. So, and this is actually the key bit right there. So, if we made a put request, especially since we know most requests will not be updating, they'll be sending this one request to process we're done. And that's where maybe you can justify post, because I don't think we worry too much about reprocessing the same thread. But the downside might be if somebody decides to spam our system, then once they start sending threads and maybe they know we are pre-processing them for abuse or whatever, so they just send like 20, 30 threads. If you are processing them using post, each and every thread will be processed. But if you're using a put type of request, then once they've done it, then we kind of might monitor the session, although if it's, let's say, along the same request line, then we might. Yeah. So, we could have a conversation on that, but, you kind of see why, depending on user behavior, the method might be worth talking about. But other than that, most of the content was perfect. In fact, I really, really appreciated that you thought of the multi-level approach without prompting. I've honestly not had anybody immediately think of that. So you've done a good job with that. Like, thought of how you're going to present them in terms of multiple levels. And then, I think I break this down for you in order to like give a sense of the sequence of steps. Yeah, for the most part, I think we already touched on the precision versus recall bit. Honestly, I'm not going to grill you on that because I know I struggle with that too. So the only suggestion I had is just use a confusion matrix. That way you avoid having to talk of the terms themselves. But that said, it always looks good if you immediately talk about it without even defining it, because it kind of gives that interviewer the illusion that I work with these metrics regularly. I know what they mean, so I don't need to think too heavily about what they mean. So, just essentially just review the resources to kind of have a sense of what high precision, low precision means. And then maybe I forgot to mention this, but this objective, the objective function or the objective of the modeling altogether, it might be something we want to highlight in the initial stages, but it's totally understandable to talk about it even at the end. I felt like it gave the interview a more natural flow, but at the end, we want that optimization in terms of process. So maybe try and touch on it right at the get-go. That way, it's not something that you might miss out on. Let's say if the interview is kind of hard and like you're stuck with some steps, you want to just knock it out of the way because it's easy to do and then keep going.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But other than that, as I said, like, I will give you a pass. Like, I think you actually really, really did a good job. I could clearly pick up on the knowledge. So if you have interviews tomorrow, I honestly would be confident you'll do well. It's more or less about refining the process. So still put in a bit more work and like try and get the processes refined. And final bit, maybe spend a bit less time on the requirements, but I was okay with this because I felt like you were talking about design as you went through it, and that's why I think that was time well spent. But in case the interview is proving to be a bit more technical, or a bit more crazy, because you'll find some interviewers who are generally hard to work with. Just try and maybe time box yourself there to at most 7 minutes or so.
Okay. 7 minutes. All right, cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions? Anything else I can clarify?
Nothing else today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I enjoyed this. I hope you did too. And it was nice talking to you.
Yeah, this was really great. Really appreciate taking your time today.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.